Welcome to the Inside Texas Football YouTube channel powered by InsideTexas.com. I'm Joe Cook, got Eric Notleen, Paul Wadlington, Ian Boyd. We are here for another Monday live episode. We're coming off a big official visit weekend. The news is rolling on Inside Texas, and we are going to talk a lot about recruiting. Obviously, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, help us get to 8,000 subscribers. And also head to InsideTexas.com. You can use the promo code IT1. It'll get you 2 months of Inside Texas access for just $1. Eric, official visit season is always a lot of fun. There were only a handful who made it to campus this past weekend. But like you noted over on Inside Texas, even with the small amount of prospects visiting, it was still an important and successful weekend for the Longhorns.
Yeah, they had a number of priorities on campus, guys that they really need for this class to maximize. Josiah Sharma, Javian Hilson, Myron Charles. Big bodies, guys from places that kind of backfilling what the state doesn't produce. You got to get big guys, and they had a number of quality players that they'd love to have in the class. Michael Terry, that recruitment took a fun turn. Caleb Chester, priority cornerback, was on campus. Caleb Edwards, it's just Tanook Hines was a bit of a surprise, although I shouldn't have been caught slipping like that. Wide receiver out of Spring to Candy. So yeah, it was a small group, but there was plenty of storylines.
Paul, the big stir that started on Friday was Josiah Sharma took to Instagram, starts taking videos of what he's seeing out in front of Texas, and there are a lot of really nice cars out in front of the Longhorns, the facility. That angered some rivals, but that's one of those, if you don't hate the player, hate the game moments for me.
Lions laying down with Lambos. Yeah. It was interesting. Look, I mean, that's where we are now. The fact is, if we were on the other side of it, we'd probably be saying, that's not what college football is about. And there were some amusing people that opined on Twitter that this needs to get out of college football, which, wow, those people don't own mirrors in their house, apparently. But yeah, I mean, that's the state of the game. It is what it is. It's about swag. And, look, these guys are going to college. Particularly these high-level recruits, they're going to college for the hopes of playing in the NFL one day. And if they can't make the NFL, there's still an opportunity for them to set themselves up pretty nicely for their lives. I don't know about you, but it would have been nice to graduate Texas with a couple $100,000 in the bank and a fat down payment on a house and a car. That would have been a nice way to start my life. So
there's a very key term that you use there, and it was graduate. And I think from all the people watching this on social media or all those videos, they probably saw that and thought like, well, they're just handing them out to these kids from, all over the country, when that's clearly not the case and clearly ill-informed. Make sure you get some questions in. We will be answering them throughout the course of the live, but we always go to the Inside Texas message board for our first couple questions as things start to trickle in. Great ones from MBW629. In the Big 12, Texas was the top scheduled target of nearly every team. They were game planned accordingly. This probably won't be the case in the SEC, but the level of competition jumps up considerably. Which do you think is tougher? Every team in a conference spending months game planning for you as their biggest game, or every team in a conference having more NFL caliber talent? Ian, I'll throw this one to you first, considering your lots of studying you've done on the Big 12. Where do you fall on this one?
I think that's going to depend on the coaching staff at Texas. I think if the coaching staff at Texas was oriented around just getting as much talent on the field as possible, the Big 12 strategy may have been a bigger hang-up than if they are a top coaching strategy group that can game plan week to week. Although, honestly, we never really saw either in the last 10 years. Like this last Sark season was the only time we saw a Texas team that actually was able to stack talent on the field, and it went pretty well against all those clever Big 12 teams. So I think ultimately the SEC is going to be meaningfully more difficult.
Paul, you've written about this a few different times over on Inside Texas, and I think aside from maybe the novelty factor, it's going to be the NFL talent, in your opinion, that is what makes this more challenging than other teams like Iowa State claiming to be your rival.
Yeah. So one thing to emphasize is, I mean, that is a real thing. And there was a sports media professor who did a bunch of polling of different college football fan bases, and 11 different schools considered Texas their primary rival. The next runner-up was 3 or 4. I can't recall. So there was something going on there. And as a Texas fan, you're probably actually struggling to come up. Like, you can come up with the first 4 or 5, and then you're actually struggling to get to 8 and 9. And that's when you realize, oh my God, Iowa State cares more about us than freaking Iowa. Their traditional rival, for the vaunted Cyhawk trophy. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a change. But to Ian's point, talent is the more important part. I think the more subtle part of this that's interesting is that Texas fans sometimes in their hubris assume that that's going to continue, that we're going to be everyone's big circled game. And I wrote an article specifically sort of dispelling that. Yeah, Texas is going to be a big deal because Texas is a big historic team and Texas is good. So if they're traveling to your town and you're, as Ian likes to say, a mid SEC program, that's going to be a big deal. You know, Kentucky will sell out Commonwealth Stadium for that game in Lexington, but they don't care more about that game than Louisville. They don't care more about that game if they host Georgia 3 weeks later. Like, people need to get over that nonsense. And, you know, I remember mentioning Florida, and people were like, well, you know, they're going to have our game circled. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're playing Georgia, LSU, Florida State. They're playing Tennessee. I mean, they're not circling Texas. Now, will A&M have Texas circled? Yes. Will OU always have Texas circled? Yes. Will Arkansas usually, particularly when you travel to them, will they have Texas circled? Sure. But part of that is a function of the schedule too, right? How it falls. So the larger point is we're playing better teams now, but these teams have other fish to fry. And so Texas fans need to get off the assumption that they're the biggest game on the schedule for every team. It's just not true. It's just not the fact. So I think that'll be an interesting adjustment for Texas fans. That said, Texas coming to your SEC town, especially the first couple of times when there's novelty, it'll be a big deal.
Eric, the bottom half of the screen talked a lot about the on-field aspect, but how does that sometimes play out on the recruiting trail? Because when Texas is going against, as it was often during some troubling times for the program, TCU and even Oklahoma State, they would sometimes not succeed against those programs, started to do so more and more as Steve Sarkisian's tenure goes on. But now that you're recruiting against SEC schools, how's that whole, I guess, the way things work? The word is escape.
Yeah, they're going to be recruiting against the teams they play. They're not going to be playing the Big 12 teams anymore, so they're not going to be recruiting against them. And they had left them behind really in Sark's first full class. But yeah, you're right. For a long time, we did have to pay attention to who Baylor was going after, and TCU, Oklahoma State, those guys, those teams you mentioned were all thorns in Texas' side at times, but that's no longer the case. I think something that's missed, and I do agree with Paul like 90% of the way. I think there's something to be said for how maniacal the Southeast is about football. And so maybe those individual teams aren't circling Texas necessarily, but they're circling their calendar more just in general because it's football and they take it more serious in the South. It's an eye-opening experience to go to games down there versus, going to Ames. And Ames was fun, don't get me wrong. But I think that the level of focus that they have on football, resources, and all these other things, which leads to better recruiting, which leads to better facilities and just a better product, is going to make it a very difficult schedule, even if these teams aren't necessarily circling Texas.
Games and Ames can lead you to missing flights, as one of us knows.
Oh man, that was a mess.
Got a good question. We'll get to some more from the Inside Texas members board, but we got a good question from Peyton Ross. Interestingly enough, not about an official visitor at Texas this weekend, but one to LSU. What could LSU have done different to now be right back in the thick of it? It seems like Decorian Moore decommitted for a reason. Is Texas that reason? Eric, I mean, you had some insight on just the whole dynamic of this recruitment and what DeCorian Moore might have wanted to do entering visit season.
Yeah, I think that was a sympathy visit. And I don't think that LSU is right back in the thick of it. So it's hard for me to entertain that question. I think Texas is in a good spot. Obviously, he's coming in this weekend for an official visit, still has Oregon. Plenty of work left to do. I don't think Texas is going to have to beat LSU to get his commitment.
Seems like it's got Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. That seems like those are the top three at this point. And LSU got the visit, but maybe not much more than that. Trying to look through other things. Got a good question here from other one from MBW 629 on the board. And Eric, this kind of goes back to what you just wrote over the weekend. It seems like Silas Bolden is an afterthought from the winter portal since he couldn't play spring ball, but last year he had about 70 touches and 1,000 all-purpose yards with 8 touchdowns for the Beavers. Surely he didn't transfer to UT to be a gadget player and be the next Keelan Robinson. So how does Sark utilize him this year, and what does our offense look like if his production matches his last year at Oregon State? You kind of wrote about this in the Humidor, and you've heard a lot of positive reviews about Bolden.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of an afterthought because he wasn't on campus. There's not much to talk about if he's not on campus. He was, I think when he committed, everybody was pretty excited about him because he's not just a little gadget guy. He can get vertical. He attacks the ball in the air. He's got better ball skills than most of those guys his size. Like, he's not just Trendon Holiday out there, which is just like a one-trick pony. But yeah, now I'm a lot more excited after talking to people after his first week of working out and being in 7-on-7s. He's extremely fast. He's short, but he's long. He's got long arms for his height. They kind of compensate for him. But really, he can run. He can literally run almost as fast as Xavier Worthy is what I was told. Based on what I'm hearing, he's got to be one of the 2 or 3 fastest guys on the team. And then we know he's got some of those softer wide receiver skills that you don't normally size in those smaller packages. You don't normally see in those smaller packages. They did bring him in with expanding the playbook in mind. They do want to do some gadget stuff, but you can go vertical with him as well. So yeah, I mean, based on that first week, I expect some production out of him for sure.
Ian, does that maybe alter how you thought they may use Silas Bolden this year? Obviously, he's going to have an impact on special teams. He doesn't have the running back traits that Keelan Robinson had, but how do you anticipate them maybe using Silas Bolden now that you know this additional detail?
Well, I've always pictured him being in the slot. I thought he'd end up being the starting slot until, DeAndre Moore and some other guys are having really good springs at that position. But I still think he'll just end up taking that spot. Now, they like to move guys around. He could probably play outside some because Sark has a lot of ways to help guys get open. But what I saw from Oregon State was if he's lined up on the line outside against a big, legitimate corner, he will have some struggles because of his lack of size. But if you just let him play off the line a little bit, he's like your quintessential terrorist college slot that's just impossible to deal with. So it should be extremely easy to get him involved, especially in this offense where they'll stack receivers, they'll motion them around. It's really hard to get. They helped Xavier Worthy quite a bit. It'll be interesting to see how he does with the Chiefs because they're just moving guys around and putting them in advantageous spots so often.
Somebody posted one of Ian's tweets.
Oh, go ahead.
We'll go back to you after Paul. Somebody posted a tweet from Ian from February noting Bolden's long speed, saying that most of these guys don't normally have that sprinter speed. They're more quicker than fast. So that's something Ian picked up on in February, and somebody brought that to the board the other day. I thought that was pretty prescient.
Paul?
Yeah, one thing to mention about him, more than height, is he's about 30 pounds south of Keelan Robinson, right? He's about 160 pounds soaking wet after a meal. So the height thing, he's not Rondale Moore. That's kind of he's not 190 pounds squatting 550. So that's a difference too. But Ian's exactly right. He's not just like a quick guy. He's fast. Like, he separates. And there's a couple of highlights of him like going deep and laying out for a ball, like catching it over his shoulder. It's like, it's not what you expect from a guy that people I think of him as like Cavante Turpin from TCU, if you remember that guy. So that's one part. The other factor is it's really weird that we might do something entirely different from Sark's predilections, which is Sark typically wants to find his 3 guys at wide receiver, and they're in there the whole game, right? They come off the field if they tweak something. That's about it. So our depth at wide receiver is far better after losing 2 guys that were high NFL draft picks. I mean, we've got 6 dudes that I'm very confident in. And so one, that's great because a couple of these guys do have, histories of soft tissue injuries, and just playing football, you're going to get injured and tweaks here and there. So it's not a big deal week to week if someone's out. And then second, I mean, talk about enforcing a vitality curve, right? I mean, these guys are all going to be competing, making each other better. But then the question still remains, is Sark going to rotate receivers? And I think it's going to just come down to playbook. I don't think it's going to necessarily come down to a slight talent difference. I think it's going to be like who's the most in their playbook and who is the most reliable. And that will probably be the way that Sark probably, makes his selection. It's the guys who self-select by not knowing what to do in certain formations or play calls.
So I know y'all don't like the being thrown and asked the comparison question. So I'll present one to y'all and see if it makes sense. You mentioned Kevontae Turpin. I like that one. What about Hakeem Grant, the Texas Tech Mighty Might, who had 1,200 yards with Pat Mahomes? Is that a good comparison for Silas Bolden, Ian?
Yeah, that's about right. I think I know who you're talking about. He was like 5'7", and they would send him vertical quite a bit.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I believe that guy had pretty decent hands too. The thing with these guys is they do need to play in either a lot of motion or more of a spread concept, so that you don't let somebody put like a Kwame Lassiter or somebody in press coverage on them, and then they can't get up to speed because they can't get where they want to be on the field. But that sounds about right to me. They actually in 2019, Sark had Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, all on the same team, and managed to get a decent amount of work for all of them. And then a few other guys on the bench like John Mechie. So that's maybe the closest we've seen to him trying to work that many talented guys onto the field. I'm curious how he did it then, because I'm pretty sure he didn't play all those guys at the same time very often.
No,
they had some injuries. Waddle got injured, and that allowed Mechie on the field. So he kind of got lucky.
No. That was 2020, though. 2019, the year before, when it was Tonga Vailoa.
So they just did it by seniority. I mean, those like, Henry Ruggs and guys like that were just, when they were younger, they just sat, and the understanding was when you replace these guys, you'll get all the snaps. So hang tight. But I think we don't have that disparity in seniority. We've got a bunch of guys who are either super talented or they're just super seasoned, or they fit a specific role really well, like a Silas Bolden. So one thing to mention about Bolden too is, he is going to have a role as a kick returner. You can pencil that in right now.
We got over 1,200, almost 1,300 people watching right now. Thank you for tuning in. Before we continue on, Paul, going to toss it to you. Need a little help thanking our sponsor, Gabe Winslow.
Our friend in the mortgage industry, Gabe Winslow. Make him your friend in the mortgage industry, Gabe Winslow. You can call him at 832-557-1095, a diehard Longhorn. I was just texting with him a moment ago about what's going on. And he is a gentleman that lives and dies with the Horns just as we do. He also lives and dies serving his customers. If you want, and you just want an impartial review of what Gabe does, go pull up Google reviews. You'll see about 150, all 5 stars, with paragraph after paragraph about the complexity of the problem that he solved for them that no other mortgage guy could provide. If you are in the market for a house, and I know it's summer, a lot of you are moving, kids are out of school, you need to give him a call. 832-557-1095. He's not your very first call. Make sure he's your last call, because at the very minimum, he's a cool dude, and he'll look at your deal and he'll tell you if it's actually doable. Because sometimes mortgage guys will sell you a bill of goods and then hope the market turns in their favor, so they don't have to deliver the news 2 weeks later that all the things they promised you were empty. So give Gabe a call. He's not going to do you that way. 832-557-1095.
Appreciate that one. Got a really solid question here from our friend Brett Nelson. Thank y'all, as always, for the super chat. Do y'all expect anything from Ryan Niblett and Aaron Bryant this year? So let's go with that. We kind of just talked about that with the wide receiver rotation. Niblett, someone, Eric, whose athleticism has always been very highly complimented throughout the program. But a lot of the guys that they brought in were brought in because maybe there wasn't as much trust in someone like Niblett for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I don't expect a ton out of him this year. I do think he'll get on the field. But we just laid out the Studley group that they have. They're too deep across the board. There's not going to be a whole lot of receptions available or targets available for Niblett. He just needs to stick with the program. He was never going to be an early contributor. He played an athlete position in high school. He was much more raw. He does have some innate footballness to him. He understands the game, but he's still learning the ropes at the position. Aaron Bryant, they brought in a lot of competition through the portal. He's going to play this year. There's no doubt about it. I don't know how much, and I don't know what to expect because, we don't even know what to expect out of Jermaine Lole, who just got on campus last week. He's bigger than Aaron Bryant from what I have understand. They had Tia Savea and Bill Norton before that. So I don't know what to expect out of him. He will play this year, but how much is to be determined. I think he's, the portals guys coming in definitely are going to steal some reps from him.
What about as far as regional rivals, NIL setup? It kind of seems like with the SEC, everybody's mostly got their ducks in a row. They may not have the financial backing that Texas has, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of infighting among collectives as you've seen at places like maybe USC or any other spots. It looks like everybody's got an organized system, but as far as financial backing, maybe it's tough to compete with Texas on that front.
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Everybody wants to win. The will to win is definitely never going to be questioned in the SEC. So everybody has a will to win. I think it took a little bit longer for some of those schools to get their NIL set up and running functionally and to the letter of the law. But you can see the schools like Ole Miss are awash with cash. You can tell by just their actions in the portal. A&M's always going to have money. Alabama everybody's trying to keep the dynasty alive in Alabama. So you're going to see them continuing to get good players. They're not going to fall off. They have a lot of people bought in right now, probably more so. Nick Saban retiring probably woke some donors that figured, hey, Nick's got this. They don't need me. A lot of guys are coming off the bench in Alabama, so they're going to be perfectly fine. LSU, that's one. I don't know how organized they are, and that's why you saw them lose out on defensive tackle after defensive tackle in the portal. But for the most part, everybody's talking about these cars. I've seen OU pushing cars. I've seen Nick Saban bragging about Ferraris. That's just, that was a made up tempest in a teapot. I wouldn't pay it much attention.
What was it? Whenever they made the last Charger, the Alabama football program shed a small tear in the locker room.
Give me a break. They're famous for all that stuff that was going on, 2008 to 2014 probably. Everybody had Chargers. It's just hypocritical.
Ian, got a question for you from our friend David Williams. What do you think about Trey Moore, Colton Vasek, and Colin Simmons all getting up to 250 and rotating at weak defensive end or buck, and moving Ethan Burke over to Jack to rotate with Sorrell and Finkley?
It's a good idea. I think that's exactly what they will try to do. I guess a lot of that depends on Burke being strong enough against the run for that to be a viable solution. Or alternatively, Vasek could be that guy. He looked pretty good in the spring. We finally got to see what Vasek looks like, and he was playing on both sides. He looked strong. He's explosive into the backfield. He got to go up against some weaker competition. He wasn't going up against, Banks and Williams, but he had didn't he have one series where it was tackle for loss, hit the quarterback, but the quarterback got a throw off. It wouldn't have counted, and then just straight up sack the quarterback the next play. He looks like he will be ready. And he's probably already up. Eric, do you know, is he up to 250 yet, Vasek?
He's north of 250.
Yeah. So
he's like 255.
It could be Burke. It could also be Vasek, the same configuration.
He's still really lean too.
Oh,
really
switch
lean
the Wesley guys potentially.
Yeah. Vasek will play in the NFL north of 270, 275. He's going to be a stud, but probably a year away before him moving over. But he's on the conveyor belt right behind Burke. So expect Burke to go over to Jack. which is right on time with Vossick coming back. Obviously, you got Moore and Simmons too. So yeah, they're in a very good position at edge.
Paul, I think the days where I can use the phrase "we're paying for the sins of Paul or Todd Orlando" are about to be over after he basically did not recruit the position for a while, and now Texas is able to replenish that room thanks to good effort from Sarkisian and also Pete Kwiatkowski.
Yeah, I mean, this is where scheme matters, right? If you run that tight front, you're not going to have a bunch of traditional edges on a, technically a 2-4-5, however you want to call it. So we've restocked that, we've replenished it. Edge was a weakness last year, frankly, particularly on pass rushing downs of situational football, end of half, end of game, right? It's a strength. I mean, it's deep. You just saw those 6 names that were put up there in the question, and the guy that's the least talented of the 6 is Justice Finkley, who's a veteran guy who's played a lot of football for Texas. So the way a room is upgrading is when guys who had previously played a lot of football for you look at the name and you're like, oh, if I power ranked these 6, he's the 6th least talented guy of that group. I mean, that's clear evidence for your eyes that you're not just subjectively falling for the hype. You actually can look at it and go, okay, well, we're getting better there. And I think that's pretty obvious.
Going to talk a little bit about official visits, but guys, we got to talk about Florida official visits. This picture from a quarterback who is visiting Gainesville over the course of the weekend officially. Remember, on official visits, they can put you up in hotel rooms. Usually each college town has like one nice one. I don't know what we're looking at here. This is
that's a quarterback. You said that's a quarterback, right? A 4-star quarterback?
Correct. The 4-star quarterback. I'm not saying it's an hourly rate hotel, but it's not much better than that.
Yeah.
He might still consider taking his shoes off if he's going to get in bed. That's pretty low class.
Do you think they put Derek Lagway in there? There's no way, right? Lagway had a different room. Lagway had a private house or something, man. There's just no way. That looks like where they filmed the first 48.
Hey, at least he got some gum. They're really going all out with the amenities.
Would you rather be criticized for having 15 Lambos, which and Lambo, you have a nice relationship with Lambo. You're just doing your part to help endorse them and sponsor them, or this? Do you think UF has a deal with this hotel chain?
Oh man, if they do, they need to reconsider it. Maybe they need to reconsider their coach. Oh man, give me the comments that were
crocodile. Give me the crocodile tears on Lambos over this hotel.
Looks like Dahmer's apartment, says someone in the chat. I love that. Good job, Pat.
That's a good one. It does. That does not compare to the 4 seasons where Texas gets to take their recruits on official visits. And speaking of official visits, like we talked about, Texas had about 7 in over the course of the weekend. Eric, we got some intel from Javion Hilson. I got to catch up with him at the airport, and that was a Florida State commit who liked what he saw compared to Florida, liked what he saw talking about when talking about Texas. But it's going to be one of those things where he's going to give Florida State the opportunity to prove why he committed to the Seminoles, even when you have Mom talking about how much she enjoyed the visit.
Well, I loved your interview with him in combination with what we wrote before he visited. We had a very good source in the Southeast that he actually thought the kid would end up at Texas. This is even before he visited. One of the things he's looking for is stability. He decommitted from Alabama because of Nick Saban. I think he's downplaying Florida if you look at Napier's situation. And Florida State is not on the firmest ground either. They're in the ACC. Money's a little tight. I'm not 100% sure Norvell's a long-term guy there. And not because he won't win, but just because he might look to upgrade. And so, yeah, Texas is quite appealing. Everything that he told you was very positive. The city, like the city, everything is nice, bigger and better in Texas, all these things. So I think if everything works out in the final hours when he goes to decide, I really like UT's chances with him. And for people who don't know, he's a very highly rated edge. Plays the same position as Colin, but plays with a much more power, I would say. Colin kind of wins with strength, of course, but also just how nimble he is. This guy is a brute force out at Buck. So Texas is in good shape for that. We're going to see how it goes with Florida State with him this week. But, I think we're going to be covering that one up until he decides.
He's got UCF as well on his docket. He's also a teammate, at least on a 7-on-7 program of Brandon Brown's. So the Texas commit who's taking visits seems to like everywhere he visits. Just saw LSU, just saw Tennessee. Will be back at Texas this week. They've been talking. We'll see how that one goes. Got to talk a little bit about Myron Charles. He was so elusive, and that's right. I sent a message to Myron like, "Hey man, can we chat?" He's like, "I'm at my gate." So there went that one. But another big successful or a big talented football player that Texas had in this weekend. That Eric, even though we're working to get more, that picture of him and Sharma in the car together outside of Littlefield Fountain was a pretty solid preview of what Texas hopes could be part of its defensive tackle class.
Well, I'm disappointed in you for not putting a flight attendant or a pilot in sleeper hold and taking his badge and a uniform and getting that interview, Joe. You need to get more dedicated. Yeah, we're going to see how it plays out, man. It's going to be Texas and Miami. I think that a lot of the things going on with Hilson resonate with Charles as well, as far as Texas's chances of getting a guy out of Florida, hostile territory. It sets up well. I mean, dude, there's not a lot of shine on Miami. Like I said, Florida State has issues. Everybody knows that Napier might be out after this season. So the time is now to strike on these guys, and Texas is giving it a shot. So I think Myron, I think it's a real recruitment. I had him at 40% before the visit, which is pretty high, I would say. I don't have a lot to change it yet. I moved Hilson from 35% to a coin flip. Yeah, I think Texas is in good shape for both. We'll see. We need to keep working the phones and get some more intel on that one.
Eric, it seems like Sark has just mastered the vulture strategy of anytime he needs some top recruits, he just goes to whichever program's coaches are on the hot seat. And builds ends, and it seems like every single fall it pays off.
Yeah, there's definitely every year there's programs to bird dog, and it's like if you need a linebacker, go see who Utah's going after, or a defensive tackle, go see what Utah's doing or up to. The same goes with coaches on the hot seat. He's benefited from so many times right now. You're right. It's probably not a coincidence.
Paul, I mentioned Josiah Sharma, who is from Folsom in the Northern California area. I looked up the on-through recruiting rankings, and this speaks to something you've written about a lot. He is, I think, the number 6 player in California. The next highest ranked defensive tackle, so the number 2 defensive tackle in California, number 62, someone Texas has offered. And then the number 3 one is in like the 100s. So that kind of speaks to why Arizona, Washington, now Alabama, after having those connections from Washington, are after him, and why Texas is trying to go to the West Coast to get one of the best big men in California.
Yeah, outside of the Southeast and into parts of Texas, you just can't find lots of big men. And every now and then they crop up in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and then those guys are just, everyone swarms and descends on them from Michigan and Penn State and schools like that. So, those guys are going to always be hugely valued in California, but the truth is they're valued everywhere. The thing about the California rankings is in the top 100, they have a rough parity towards the Texas top 100. Once you get past that 100, actually, Texas maintains quality, and then California sort of falls off a cliff. Some of that has to do because a lot of the really good football in California is just played by a few schools, but those few schools are loaded. And then the other part is California is just not actually, surprisingly, not very well scouted. You have a lot of guys sort of fall through the cracks there, and they go do a junior college stint or something, and then they merge, and you got an Aaron Rodgers or something. So, it's super interesting, but there's a deficit of big men that can play all over, and Texas is going to throw their hat in the ring everywhere. And that area, one advantage that Texas has over many of these schools, particularly in the SEC, is that there's direct flights to Austin, Texas from everywhere. And not having to do a change, doing a regional and all that, it doesn't sound like much, but when it comes to the players' parents, their family, their ability to see the player, it's a big deal to be able to jump on and have 3 different airline options that keep prices down. And you could fly from Sacramento to Austin direct on a weekend for $330 instead of, a regional jet. And then you're doing a layover in Atlanta and then flying to Gainesville or Tuscaloosa. So, all that stuff does add up and it matters. And it is why Texas needs to not necessarily recruit states, but outposts in the West. We absolutely should take advantage of the SEC and being open to those players, but abandoning Salt Lake City, abandoning Phoenix, abandoning the little strip in Orange County of like 4 elite high school superpowers, Bishop Gorman in Vegas. You want to still stay active and present because it doesn't take any effort, frankly. And also, these are all direct flights. It's really easy to get out there, show your face, and still maintain some continuity with those programs.
Hey, Folsom is one of those schools too. Jake Browning is from there. They've got Ryder Lyons is the #1 quarterback to some in the 2026 class. Walker Lyons' brother. They've got a tight end committed to Alabama on that team that I was watching the other day. I don't know, tight end or edge. He could play either one. I'll be interested to see what Utah does with him. But that kid could play at Texas. There's no doubt in my mind that I'm not saying he's the best option. They've got good options at tight end. I'm sure that guy got a thorough evaluation. They've got talent in Folsom, and it's an easy flight for the coaches. And there's, they've got Caleb Edwards right down the road there. I think, there's always been some talent here or there in Sacramento. Based on my, unprofessional, I don't know that area well, but I'd guess people are moving out of Sacramento and up into the hills a little bit. And that's why we're seeing a little bit of a boom there.
Yep.
Ian, kind of to that point, and not to veer too far out of football, but Sharma has had, there's been reports that a family member would move to Texas if he does end up at Texas. With 2026 elite safety Zalis Hicks, he's got an aunt who's involved in state politics in Texas, to where his family's considered maybe a move as well for his college choice. You're moving down here. It seems like with all these different moves, a lot of people flocking to Texas, also flocking to Florida, some other states. Some part of that migration is going to bring football players as well, and Texas may be trying to reap the benefits of it. Is that something that you've noticed?
Yeah. The state's population could be 50 million within our lifespan at the rate we're going. The area I'm moving into is opening an elementary like every other year in North Austin. It's crazy. Demographically, I think it's a pretty diverse crowd that's coming down to Texas from all over the country. There's a lot of different opportunities, so it's going to manifest in some fresh football talent. And it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be areas of Texas that might look different football-wise in the future as a result of that. It'll be interesting the extent to which, with such massive migration, is it assimilated into football-first Texas culture, or are there areas where that's not really the case? From what I can tell in the Austin area, it's actually just leading. The people are being assimilated, and you're getting more and more legitimate football powers in places where there weren't really before, like Vandegrift, Lake Travis. It used to be just Westlake for the longest time, and now there's like multiple powers in that area.
Even Round Rock started to show some progress, and all the South Austin schools kind of in between here and San Marcos, those are expanding 6A schools, and they're getting more and more. San Marcos itself is a pretty good program, as Eric can attest to from driving by it a good amount on the way up to Austin. Anything else on that subject? I got one more thing to close on before we get out of here.
Yeah, I've written about this quite a bit, and it's the larger demographic trends of the United States, right? So people are flocking to the SEC footprint. Texas, Florida, those are the obvious ones, but then there's individual cities. So, for example, Knoxville and Nashville are growing like wildfire, just like Austin, right? Just like Dallas, just like Houston. You've got South Carolina has had a massive demographic shift of people just coming in there for quality of life, cheap houses, and they like the living out there. There's a beach and there's some hills, and you're not that far. And even sort of SEC proximate, you've got North Carolina, you've got, as the federal government continuously expands, Virginia continues to expand. So, these things are all trends that are just inexorable, and you're going to see big shifts in football. And as Ian said, the issue is, are these people adapting and adopting to the sort of local mores and folkways? And the answer seems to be yes. Like, that's kind of why they're choosing these areas. They're trying to live in a different way. And, there's some exceptions, obviously, but All the predictions of the end of football 5-10 years ago. Remember all that?
Yeah.
You know how periodically all the national sports writers try to end football every 2 or 3 years? I noticed that. No one else ever seems to notice that. But
Yeah, I notice it all the time. Hey, what about Georgia is another one, Paul. Tons of move-ins to Georgia.
yeah, I mean, Georgia's massive. I mean, Georgia, I think, is the 7th most populous state in the United States now.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
they've got big military
shocking.
influence there. A lot of move-ins, and then I would say it's even beyond America. We get a lot of move-ins from around the world. West Africa. If you go to Southwest Houston, there are athletes that are not, their parents weren't born here. A lot of them, a lot of times, where they're third generation, second generation, and yeah, they're adapting to football. Not everybody does. We just beat Pakistan in cricket last week, under 20 Pakistan. So maybe
I love how Americans weren't even aware we had a cricket team, and then we beat Pakistan, and you see USA people like, yes, I knew we could do it. And it's like,
there's
really
a giant facility in Cyprus, right outside of Houston, for cricket. So hey, maybe one day we'll be dominating that too.
Well, you hit on an important point about the Nigerian and West African emigres, the recent ones. They are going to other communities where there's other Nigerians and other West Africans.
Right.
And if you just look at the pure demographics, they inordinately churn out not just athletes, but NFL football players. I mean, far more than any other control that you might reasonably assume within their demographic. And it has to do, there's all sorts of cultural reasons, there's familial reasons, there's demographic and genetic reasons. The best sprinters in the world all hail from West Africa originally, whatever diaspora they end up in, whether that's Jamaica, Canada, US, or West Africa. And the best distance runners in the world all hail from a pretty small area in Africa, but genetically completely different. Africa has massive genetic diversity, and most people don't know that because they have a sort of culturally conditioned idea of what culture or race is. And it's actually under the genes, it's got the most diversity. And so because of that, the sports that we favor in the United States favor genetic outliers, like people on the far edges of the bell curve. And the more diversity you have, the more success you'll have athletically. So anyway, it's an interesting aside. Maybe we should talk about it sometime. We'll probably get banned for talking about like these things, but it's all interesting if you have any interest in looking at it or reading about it.
I'm glad you mentioned the cultural discipline. I think that's an important aspect that we know very well from Charles Omenihu and Joseph Osai and players like that. One last thing, though, guys, I know y'all like Football Scoop. Got a lot of good stuff over there. They put out an article that Texas is returning its head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, strength coach, and starting quarterback ahead of the 2024 season. The Longhorns, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Florida all are in that category in the SEC. Ian, I wrote on Inside Texas about what this might mean. It's happened a few times since the beginning of the Mac Brown era. Sometimes there was some Sims and Applewhite fighting. Sometimes it was, Charlie Strong. But with Steve Sarkisian, Quinn Ewers, Pete Kwiatkowski, Kyle Flood, and his title as offensive coordinator, all of them coming back, Torrey Becton, how much does that really affect things in the 2024 season, in your opinion?
A lot. I think in one sense, it's just sort of an indicator of they haven't had to make a lot of changes because they've been successful, right? So obviously you have good guys in place that have been able to have at least some degree of success in all these roles in order to maintain the continuity. But I think something that you can really observe if you watch like Oklahoma over the years when they had Bob Stoops for 20 years and then they had Lincoln Riley and much the same staff intact after that, is that when a staff is there for a long time, they're able to adapt and problem solve, and they have the same guys around. So like when you have the same staff around, they'll start to take a player and start to develop them towards solving a potential problem they've noted, right? And all the inputs into the program are being oriented towards things that they're observing over multiple years. And then when you bring in a lot of change, sometimes you need change to shake things up. Sometimes you need change to upgrade. But you can lose the benefits of continuity. You can lose all the benefits of like the adaptation and solves that you've been working on for multiple seasons. So it's not always, it's not a sure thing that that's going to result in like a deep playoff run or national championship or whatever, but it's a good sign. And I think it opens up possibilities. I mean, like we were just talking about the edge room. Like we've never even gotten to see Pete Kwiatkowski use edges the way that he would prefer to use them because they haven't had the room for it yet. So we're going to get to see some benefits of that this season that we haven't seen before because he's had all this time to build it up.
Paul, I think when you look at the list of 4 that I mentioned, you have Texas, Georgia, Ole Miss, 3 teams going for it this year. But you also have Florida, and that's not a program that's been, as we kind of dogged on a little bit, the bastion of success over recent years with Billy Napier. So when it doesn't work, what does that say as well?
I mean, Florida, for whatever issues they're having, they appear to be phenomenal recruiters. I mean, that staff and Napier himself, they put a ton of emphasis on it, and they're probably right in the long term that the best way they're going to win again is recruit their way out of it. And that's certainly what Auburn believes. They didn't even do bowl prep, and they got humiliated. And they freaking asked Freeze about it, and he's like, "Yeah, I've been just recruiting. I didn't even look at the game plans." I mean, and it's a credit to the sophistication of fans that they didn't just immediately fire him, right? 20 years ago, that's what would have happened to the guy. Auburn fans are like, I'm mad about that, but yeah, I get it. That's the only way we're going to get this program back. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe did I miss the point of the question? You were trying to say one thing's not like the other, or?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to see like why where there's 3 cases of success. Georgia had a great year last year, just didn't meet their super lofty expectations. Texas had a great year. Ole Miss had won 10 games. But then you have Florida who just just missed a bowl game again. They still come back, and a lot of it has to do with the schedule, but no one expects much from them during this upcoming season, even with all that continuity. And I'm just wondering
it's exactly that. They put all of their emphasis on recruiting. I mean, Ian's made this observation before that many SEC position coaches are recruiters first and developers second, to put it kindly. Some of them are recruiters first, second, and third, and developers fourth. So I think with Florida, just everything is about, I mean, they begin their coaches meetings with, let's talk about what you've done on the recruiting trail. When's the last time you talked to so-and-so? When's the last time? They're not talking about installs. They're not talking about how they want to play, Ezekiel's wheel when they play Texas, right? So that's it. And Napier's always been known as a phenomenal recruiter. So his belief is, I can win enough that my recruits will come to fruition. That I can stick around, and then in year 3, 4, you'll start to see the talent hit the field that I'm getting. I think the more likely scenario is that his successor gets to get the fruits of his recruiting. But the truth is, with the portal and the way we structured everything, unless that dramatically changes, I think a lot of that talent will just leave and they'll just go somewhere else. So I don't know if hiring the pure recruiter coach is quite as attractive as it used to be just 5 years ago.
Eric, any thoughts on that subject? Because it's kind of funny looking through the teams that Texas had. There's the 2018 Longhorns, which had a great season. But then there's the 2019 Longhorns, which obviously underperformed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's up to the administrators to know whether or not the guy's the right man for the job. When Sark went 5-7 and everybody was freaking out, we said everybody was doubling down on him. Everybody believes in him. They're going to play the long game. They're going to let him build it the right way and keep accruing talent. If you got the right guy, that's what you got to do. But it's up to them to realize whether or not they have the right guy. And the win-loss is not going to be the determination of it. The process behind the scenes that they're going to have keen insight into is what they're going to have to use to determine whether or not they have the right guy. It's not going to be wins and loss. They can't give in to fan pressure. The Texas administrators showed spine as they have numerous times in their time at UT. They knew they had the right guy, and they kept backing him. Napier will be lucky if he has that sort of support. But he also has to earn it. He's got to earn it the right way. So it'll be interesting to see. A lot of administrators they'll take the easy way out and make the change. Everybody's fortunate and happy now that Texas stuck with Sarkisian when, there were a lot of doubters that first year, especially right as A&M was putting together that recruiting class. I can still hear the echoes from the board from that time period. But I'm not sure Napier's the guy. It doesn't look like it to me, but I don't watch him every day.
Good talk as always. Thank y'all so much for watching this episode. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the Inside Texas Football YouTube channel. We're on our way to 8,000 subscribers. Would love to get there before the season starts. We'll have a ton of stuff over the course of season, but also during official visit season here in June and July, and then camp in August. Head to InsideTexas.com. Use the promo code IT1. That'll get you 2 months of premium access for just $1. Again, got to thank our sponsor, Gabe Winslow. Go to mortgagesbygabe.com or call him at 832-557-1095. Eric, Paul, Ian, thank y'all so much. We'll see you next time on the Inside Texas Football YouTube channel, powered by InsideTexas.com.